There's an old adage when it comes to telling stories that you want to start as late into the story as possible. It's a tough balance to make because you want the audience to be as emotionally connected to the characters as possible by the time you present them with some big defining moment. But you don't want to spend so long setting up the character that the story kind of becomes boring and they lose interest before that defining moment even happens. Superhero comics particularly have this trouble because of how many times you see, new number one issues for a character or all the different jumping on points. And there's another adage with comics, in that any comic could be someone's first. Again, it's even more true for big superhero books in the current landscape. So as a writer and artist taking on a new book, a new entry point for readers, you have to strike this balance perfectly for the book to work effectively. A few episodes ago I talked about Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely on the Multiversity Pax Americana, and now I'd like to delve back into their work on the fantastic All-Star Superman. I've wanted to talk about this book for a while, primarily because of its opening few pages, which are genuinely stunning in their approach to laying out the landscape for this iteration of Superman, and getting us as readers so quickly caught up to speed on what we need to know and how we're supposed to take it. You're watching Strip Pile Naked, as always, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So, opening pages are very tough at the best of times, and I'm sure you've all got examples of comics that have had a rough start but turn into great comics by the end. I've got plenty. So particularly with a character like Superman, whose origin has been told a million times before, you don't want to hang about. So when we open the first page of All-Star Superman, we get given these 4 horizontal stacked panels, and we turn the page and get a double page splash. Now that's pretty bloody cool, right? But it works on a few different levels as well. The first and most obvious is the reveal. I've said it before and no doubt I'm sure I'll say it again, but the page turn is one of the most important things you've got in your arsenal when telling stories in comics. It's a medium that both exists all at once but also linearly, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit more at the end, but what you need is to build tension and reveals whenever and however you can. So on a basic level, the page sets up a style and then it just breaks it really quickly with this big wide splash page. You go from 4 stacked panels to one of the biggest images you can get in American comics. And the added emphasis comes from quietly restricting any of his art going to the bleed on the initial page as well. And that means kind of running all the way to the page edge, not being constrained by actual panel borders. Each of those 4 panels on that first page is contained within the borders of the panel, and when you turn the page, the double splash hits all the way to the very edge of the page. It's a nice contrast of packed imagery in a page to kind of a big, wide open space. Now, subtextually, that's also really interesting, because what you're being given in terms of content on the initial page is 4 moments that are supposed to explain who Superman is. And they're almost icons, they're ideas of things. This is drawn out through the language Morrison uses in the caption boxes as well to explain them. There's a cold finality to them, it's not personal language. For example, you've got the choice of doomed planet over something more like a home none could escape from. Instead of desperate scientists, he could have chosen something more akin to parents who he would never see again. That sort of idea. The language in its present way, it's almost matter of fact. And all this helps when we turn the page, because we're being presented with Superman's entire backstory here. I mean, up to a point. This is a setup for how Superman ends up on Earth, but interestingly, not really for who he is. These 4 panels are not what make him a man or what make him Superman, but they are what lead him to end up in a position where he can become Superman. Which in effect is what the All-Star Superman comic is actually about, getting to the root of who Superman is, so it's clever that Morrison chooses to tell you his backstory up to a point. Anyway, back on this transition. It goes from doomed planet, desperate scientists, last hope, kindly couple, Superman. It tells us these are elements that lead to this man. It makes that double splash work even better because of that continuing link. Following the same structure of the first page too, this is what Superman is. This terrific, superheroic man flying through the air with the sun on his back. It's clearly linked to his power. It's a wonderful image of Superman. It also follows the same setup that the first page takes. So with the opening 4 panels, each panel has a single image and a single understanding to be presented with each rendering. In panel 1, we have Superman's home planet of Krypton exploding. You can see the hint of a ship flying away, but there's a clear image being presented. The surface is cracking, we don't have to look anywhere else in the panel, in fact there's not really anything else to see. And that follows with panel 2, where we get his parents holding each other as the bright light explodes around them. There's no other visual to look at, it's just the centrally framed couple. There's elements to it that are worth noting, such as their hopeful, doomed expressions, and them holding each other close, hand in hand. It's very sweet, powerful, iconic, but singular. With the third panel again, centrally framed straight down the middle, is the ship that a young Superman is being sent away in. There's some clever colouring we'll get to in a sec to focus your eye, but again, a single direct image. And finally, the Kents, once again, straight down the middle. There's a slight change with the final panel which leads nicely into the double splash, in that the Kents take up like a ton of room, and your eye is led off the page by this hint of red from the cloak or fabric that Superman had been packed away in as a kid. It seems to add a bit more weight to this final panel, for me anyway, and adds a heavy sense of importance to that image, which is a way of more directly tying a response to who Superman is through the Kents. This follows through with a double splash as well. I think in comics you see double splashes to show off big visuals, but here it's not used for that, because it still follows the rule established on the first page. There's only one thing to look at across these entire 2 pages, and it's Superman. There's no other visual, no other point of focus. I think if they wanted to present who Superman was, again, there's a multitude of things you could have gone for. It could have been as simple as Superman fighting a villain, doing something very heroic, using that as the visual, but it's just Superman. That's a very brave thing for a big double splash, but the effect is immediate, right? It hits you with its simplicity and its power. It's not watered down by anything else. And you've gone from 4 stacked panels, 4 images on 1 page, to 1 image across 2 pages. And there's this other element at work I kind of mentioned briefly a second ago with Jamie Grant's colours. A big part of Superman's lore is the sun, it's where he derives all of his powers from, it's always present. And Grant brings that heavily into the first page too. The opening panel has an orange warmth, and the edges around the main circle here hint at a light behind it. The second panel obviously has a heavy white around it indicating the light from the explosion, but again it ties it back into that idea of light and sunlight. The third panel actually pulls your eye to the left initially because it's got the brightest point on the panel, and it creates some movement by taking your eye from the left across to the right to see the center image, but there's a sense of light again. And of course, obvious in that final panel is the sun behind the heads of the Kents, which actually creates an almost halo-like feel to them, right? As though they're kind of saints or something. But that final panel also breaks the palette that we've previously seen. There's a very heavy orange and yellow feel to all 3 previous panels, but that changes with this blue, purple and red feel with the Kents. If you look at panel 2, that colour of blue there gets almost washed out entirely, but with the Kents, it's still there and quite saturated. It's almost like they're the ones stopping the panel from being consumed by that colour by being in front of the light, something which has only meant bad and destruction in the previous images. So you can see that there's actually a lot going into this opening, and from what looks like a very uncomplicated set of panels and a very simple double splash, there's a lot of craft and thought and engineering going into this to make it seem as simple as it does. And earlier in the episode, right near the start if you can recall that far, I said about comics existing both all at once, but also linearly. So what I mean by that is, this is a problem that a few people have brought up at various times in the comments for Strip Panel Naked, in that when you turn a page, you can basically see everything that's going on, even if you mean to or not. And it's just the way comics are. You can kind of see everything from the top of the page to the bottom of the page sort of instantly. And you can skip to any page you want in a comic at any time, there's no stopping you. And it means that you can struggle to hide elements from your reader if you aren't being very careful about your page counts, and an understanding of where a page turn will actually occur in your story and in your comic. But Morrison has built this page turn as an intrinsic part of the opening, and in no way would that effect work as stunningly as it does if, say, the double splash was visible at the same time as the opening page, if you had all 3 pages laid out together. He hides that from you, essentially making this comic and this opening a very linear experience for every reader. He hits you immediately with this breathtaking visual because you don't expect it to come, and that's a very powerful, engaging and emotive response to get from an audience reading a comic. And the final point to make off the back of that is how you feel when turning that page. This encapsulates everything I've mentioned into one big moment really as well, That page turn with it being a double splash, extending all the way to the bleed, its singular focus of just Superman, it hits you immediately. You get the effect straight away, there's no digging around for information, there's no crazy over-the-top visual moments, just a musicality of quick beat, 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 and bang, Superman. All-Star Superman is one of the strongest modern superhero books in my opinion, and one that I could recommend wholeheartedly to anyone with even a passing interest in superhero comics. But the reason why it got me in the first place, the reason why I have such a strong response for the book, is how it opens in a way that entirely caught me off guard, and it kind of took my breath away. In 3 pages, Morrison, Quietly and Grant give you emotion, scale, history. It really doesn't come much better than this. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Panel Naked, we'd love you to check out our Patreon, where you can support us for making more videos and get access to tons and tons of extra content as well. For more comics talk and analysis, you can find me on Twitter @HassanOE, and finally hit subscribe right there on the right to keep up to date with all the new Strip Panel Naked videos, and we'll see you next time.